By the 2010s, domestic set, family-centric horror had returned to the spotlight. The success of movies like The Babadook, Get Out, Hereditary, The Invitation and The Witch all proved that audiences were ready for a quieter, more human kind of horror. But where does that leave cosmic, sci-fi and alien horror films? In 2016, director Dan Trachtenberg made a single-location thriller about three strangers trapped together in a bunker with a supposed alien invasion happening outside. Then in 2018, John Krasinski made a terrifying monster movie about a family living silently in a rural farmhouse under constant threat of sound-sensitive alien predators. Join me as we conclude our journey through the evolution of alien horror, and we discuss 10 Cloverfield Lane and A Quiet Place. Welcome back to the evolution of horror. My name is Mike Munzer, and as ever, I am your host. If you're tuning in for the first time, then welcome. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the history and the evolution of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres one series at a time. We are currently in the middle of our 7th season, exploring the evolution of alien, sci-fi and cosmic horror, and this is part 29. This week's episode is sponsored by $20 Patreon subscriber Casket Clap, and in this week's episode, as that intro suggested, we're going to be discussing 10 Cloverfield Lane from 2016 and A Quiet Place from 2018. These are our last two deep dive discussions of the series, our two most recent alien sci-fi horror classics. So these will be, of course, as ever, spoilerific discussions, so please give these movies a watch. They are both bangers before listening to our discussion. Before we get started, just a quick note to say that this is, of course, the penultimate episode in the series. Next week's episode will be our conclusion, and for that, I'd love to hear from you guys. Do drop me an email, evolutionofhorror@gmail.com, with any feedback, any questions, any comments, any reviews. You can send me your top 10 alien movies, basically any alien feedback, and I will try and read it out and respond to it on next week's conclusion and mailbag episode. After that, we'll be taking a couple of months off from the main podcast before the next series, Series 8, starts later on in the year. But of course, over on Patreon, bonus episodes will continue for $10 patrons every single week. So you can head over there, patreon.com/evolutionofhorror, to continue getting weekly content during our hiatus. So let's get on with our 10 Cloverfield Lane and A Quiet Place discussions. I sat down with longtime friend of the pod, very good friend of mine, the UK editor of Den of Geek, Rosie Fletcher, to discuss these two modern classics in depth. Enjoy. Hello, Rosie Fletcher.
Hello.
Hello. This is so nice, isn't it? It feels like it's been far too long since we've done this together.
It has. It's really nice to be back. I haven't seen you in the flesh in about 2 years, so what a joy.
I think the last time, at least in like the podcast world, that we were together in the flesh was Invisible Man. We discussed Invisible Man together, didn't we?
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah, which would have been, great film. Absolutely great film. And like one of the last cinema films before the pandemic.
Yeah. In fact, actually, that probably was the last time we saw each other, thinking about it. Yeah. That was, so it's been far too long. How have you been? How's the pandemic been for you?
Well, it's not ideal.
No.
It's been a bit tough, but it's all right. I mean, I've been very lucky with Den of Geek that I've remained employed and have been able to work from home. And we launched a print product at the beginning of this year, which is, as you know, my true passion is magazines. So it's been all right, you know. Can't complain.
Exactly. Well, that's it. That's what I always say as well. It's like, can't complain. So let me ask you a little bit about, we're right at the end of this series of this kind of subgenre we've been covering, which is sci-fi horror, alien horror or cosmic horror, that kind of thing. What are your thoughts generally on this kind of area of horror? Are you a fan?
Yes, I very much am. And I was thinking about this when I knew I was coming on, and what is it about aliens that we find so fascinating? And I think part of it is it's plausible.
Yes, right.
You know, because realistically, there probably are aliens.
Yes.
It's plausible, but it's also not restrictive in the sense that we have absolutely no idea what might be out there. So anything is possible. And like one of the great things about horror that I always say is it's kind of the place of the unfettered imagination. And so with aliens, you can just basically make up anything, and it's kind of plausible, but it's also incredibly unpredictable.
Yeah.
Because we are faced with worlds where humanity has no idea what these creatures or entities or beings are going to do. And so while with zombies and ghosts and vampires and werewolves, there are kind of rules that we as viewers understand. That's not really true with aliens. So, you know, sometimes they're benevolent, sometimes they're not. You don't know what they're going to do.
Yes.
So I think, I think that gives a really great sort of playing ground.
Yeah, you're so right. It's the unknowability of them, isn't it? That is so good, and like there are no limits to what you can create with these stories. What about like the idea of space too? Because I find the idea of space terrifying. If somebody offered you, Rosie, like a ticket to go into space for free or to the moon or something, would you go? Do you think?
Probably not.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't.
I don't know. I worry that it would be one of those things where I'd think, no, come on, you have to go, because when is this ever going to happen again? And you will see things. But then I worry that I will go to space or the moon, and then I won't be able to unsee what I've seen, and then everything in my head will explode, and I won't. It'll be like, how can I go back to my normal life because I've seen the world from outside? So now I think I probably would go. We're
going to talk about two classics, already I think are kind of considered classics from the last few years. So let's begin with 10 Cloverfield Lane.
You can't leave. An attack means fallout, which contaminates the air above ground. That's how it works.
Well, how long do we have to wait until it's safe?
Depends on proximity to the closest blast, 1 year, maybe 2. And that's if we're talking about weapons that we know of. Russians are developing some nasty stuff, and if the Martians finally figured out a way to get here, their weapons will make the Ruskies look like sticks and stones. Luckily, I prepared for this.
I need to use your phone then to call my family and tell them that I'm safe here and make sure they're okay.
Michelle, they're not okay.
How do you know that?
Everyone outside of here is dead.
Rosie, set us up. Tell us what the story is of 10 Cloverfield Lane.
Sure. Well, it's actually a very simple and very effective setup. So you have a young woman, Mary Elizabeth Winstead, who is run off the road by a man called Howard, played by John Goodman. When she wakes up, she's in a what would you call it, a survival bunker?
Yeah.
And she's broken her leg, and she's hurt her leg, and she's chained up. So, and he tells her, there's a deadly plague outside, and so I'm keeping you here to keep you safe. But she's like, not sure about that. Why am I chained up? And then she realizes that there's a third person called Emmett in the bunker with her, who's played by John Gallagher Jr. And so it's a very contained, very sort of tight three-hander. And what it's playing with is he saving her? Is there a plague outside, or is he trying to hurt her, or could it be a combination of those things?
Is
and also, and who do you trust? So we are Michelle. She's our eyes and ears. So do you trust Emmett? Do you trust Howard? Is he just a nice guy who's trying to help her and she's constantly railing against him? Or is he some kind of sinister beast? And it really keeps you on your toes all the way through.
You're so right. I only watched this for the second time this week. I hadn't seen it since I first watched it. But tell me a bit about your kind of history with this film. What do you think of it generally?
So I love it.
Yeah.
I remember seeing it at a screening room, and at the end of it, throwing up my hands and going, yes! Because I liked it so much.
Yes.
And not everybody in the screening room with me loved it as much as me, but it gave me a real buzz.
Me
I
too.
absolutely loved it. Thought it was amazing. And then later, while I was doing a little bit of script consultancy, I came across the script for the original script, which was called The Cellar, which had later been rewritten by Damien Chazelle.
Amazing.
But he didn't write the Cloverfield stuff in it.
Right.
Somebody else did, but I can't remember who that was. And so I read that, and it's really interesting, and it's really good. It's just quite different. So I'm quite fascinated by this film. I think it's actually pretty genius, quite honestly.
Right, that's really interesting. And there's so much there that we'll talk about as we go, particularly as to what happens with the end and the final act in this film. And I think that's where a lot of people, it divides opinions, I think. But obviously that's the reason why we're covering it in this particular series too. But yeah, that's really interesting. Let me start off by asking you about the whole Cloverfield element to it then. I don't know how long it's been since you've seen the original Cloverfield, but what are your thoughts on that original, and what do you think of this one in comparison, I suppose, as a kind of sequel, I guess?
So the original Cloverfield, when I first saw it, I liked it, but I didn't love it. I think I've seen it since, and I think I liked it slightly more, having seen it since. But I think for me, it came out at a time when, so obviously there's lots of parallels to like 9/11 at that time.
Yes.
And it was a lot about terrorism.
Yes.
And the found footage thing was pretty prevalent. So some of the characters are quite annoying in Cloverfield. So while I think Cloverfield is effective and I think it's clever, and actually for its time it was pretty smart, and the whole marketing thing was really interesting as well. I do prefer 10 Cloverfield Lane though. I do think it stands up better, and I do think that there's something so pared down and interesting, and the performances particularly were just exceptional.
100% agree with you. I really loved Cloverfield when I first saw it. It kind of blew my mind in the cinema when I first watched it back in the day. But I don't think for me it's actually held up that much. I sort of rewatched it for this podcast, and it feels so much of a sort of time and place, and it's so much of that kind of that found footage era and that post 9/11 era. And I don't, like you say, the characters are a bit annoying, and other than it's kind of cool ideas, it didn't really have much more. But this film is just like a properly well written, well performed little like story, isn't it? You know, it's so good. Yeah,
it is. And I think so we'll get onto this later about the Cloverfield-ness, but I think if it was made in a different era and didn't have the Cloverfield-ness, I could see a world where it would be an absolutely celebrated masterpiece. You know, I could see it being, it isn't that because it's genre, you know, for better or worse, but like I could see it being like, well, maybe this should be considered for an Oscar. Maybe this should be kind of, you know, one of these
elevated
films.
horror almost.
Elevated horror,
yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I agree with that. Yeah, that's so true. Let's start by talking about Mary Elizabeth Winstead then, because like you say, we are her character. We are Michelle, aren't we, from the beginning of this film? It kind of begins with her sort of fleeing a relationship, I suppose, right, as best we can sort of gather, and then we sort of with her every step of the way. Do you think that what do you think of her as a character and kind of Mary Elizabeth Winstead's performance of her?
I think she's excellent, and I think I loved her as a character because I think she does the things that you think that you would do. Now, of course, nobody knows what they would do unless they've been in that situation. But like, she makes very rational decisions and very sensible decisions.
Yes.
She is an interesting female character who is not like, you don't see her in histrionics. You don't see her kind of screaming and crying. A lot of these tropes of female, or like these previous tropes of female characters don't really come across with her. But she's also not a Terminator. Like, she's just a fairly normal, sensible, rational woman in a completely irrational situation, and she's just trying to navigate what's going on here. So it's not like, it's much smarter than, you know, like a straightforward kidnapping movie, because, you know, so certainly earlier on she really definitely thinks she's been kidnapped, but later on we start doubting that, and we start thinking, as does she, maybe I'm being actually quite cruel to somebody who's just a bit of a strange guy.
Who may be a bit fragile almost,
right,
you know.
But being strange is not a crime. And, you know, so I think she's a very, very believable, very likeable character.
I completely agree. She's so good because she really, like you said in your description, like, we are her, basically, right? Like, she has to take us through that uncertainty and that roller coaster of going, what's really happening, you know?
That's right. And so it's her, so we have to, for it to work at all, we have to believe that she isn't quite sure. so that we can be not quite sure.
Exactly. And you're right, like I kind of forgot about that until I rewatched it this week, but she's so smart and so resourceful with like everything she does. I'm like, wow, I probably wouldn't have thought to do that, but amazing, and that's actually, there's something really nice, isn't there, about watching really smart characters on screen as well, I think,
Yeah.
do something good,
Right, because it really goes against a lot of tropes that we had seen in the past.
Yes.
I mean, and these are quite outdated tropes now, but this idea of like these sort of scantily clad women screaming and crying, like that's just not who she is.
Yeah, that kind of like, don't go back in the house or whatever kind of and it does kind of play with those tropes, doesn't it? Like at the beginning when she's wakes up on that sort of mattress like chained to the wall, it's like this almost could be a kind of torture porn movie in its setup, right? As well, and it almost feels like the film is kind of playing with those tropes a little bit at the beginning, doesn't it?
I think that's very true, and I think but it also doesn't ignore her femaleness in that she is physically smaller than certainly than John Goodman's character, who's a big bloke.
Yes.
And actually smaller than Emmett as well.
Yes.
So she doesn't do things. So I'm slightly digressing here.
No,
but
go for it.
Promising Young Woman, for example, which is one of my favourites of the last couple of years.
Yes.
Brilliant film. Like, talks about the reality of being physically smaller,
Yes.
and so it's not safe to react with violence towards people, and even more so, they're in a contained space. So she has to make sensible choices. But she has to take opportunities where they're presented. So she isn't immediately antagonistic. She isn't immediately violent, but she does anytime she does have a chance to get away. And I think it's not talked about specifically, but you're very aware of her in this position, potentially locked down for years.
Yes.
With two men. So the threat is always quietly there in the background. But you're not even always sure what the threat exactly is.
It's so true, yeah. And actually, let me ask you, speaking of lockdown, right, did this film play differently for you watching it now, watching it in 2021, watching it post-pandemic,
Yes, it did, yeah.
Yeah.
I think you found the same thing, didn't you?
I did. There's something really even more kind of chilling or poignant about it in a weird way.
I mean, I don't want to go too dark, but it did make me think of how awful it must be to be locked down in an environment where you don't feel safe.
Yes.
Like that really, like that was a very uncomfortable thing to think, that you can't really run away, but you don't feel safe inside.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it's a really scary world that this film takes place in a way, because yes, is she more safe inside or is she more safe outside? There's that moment when she finally kind of breaks free and she gets to the door, and then that woman is banging on the door, right? And she's got all the scarring on her face, and you're like, oh, okay, so there is actually some sort of virus potentially, or and that's and I think it makes you so much more aware in some ways of John Goodman's character's perspective, of Howard's perspective of being very germ-phobic and this, like being extra cautious. That's something that's been at the forefront of our minds in the last 2 years as well, right?
Yeah. So it is constantly playing with what if he's right and she is wrong, and his character is very delicately handled. So like he doesn't. Are we doing spoilers, I guess?
Yeah, we can, yeah.
He doesn't sort of reveal his hand till quite late on. So at the point which you mentioned, where she goes up and sees the woman, and you're like, oh my God, you can't leave. Yeah. In my mind, I'm like, what's he going to do to her when she goes back?
Yes.
But he doesn't massively punish her at that point.
He doesn't. And there's actually a kind of just like a sort of jump cut almost to like she's just back in her bedroom, quote unquote bedroom, as soon as that scene's over, right, as well, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, it's true. Let's talk about John Goodman then, and Howard. What an amazing character. Again, like the film and the mystery sort of entirely rests on him and that performance in a way, doesn't it? You know?
It does. And like you said, our immediate expectation is that he's going to be some terrible abusive, aggressive kidnapper guy, because we know he's run her off the road pretty early on. But as we go on, and Emmett's character is interesting as well, because Emmett has chosen to be there. Yeah,
that's interesting as
which
well.
Is interesting.
And also that Howard did not plan for that. He didn't want Emmett there. Yeah.
And it's like, does he not want Emmett there because he wants to do something terrible to Michelle, or is it because he hasn't really planned for that and he doesn't want some random guy in his bunker? And so all the while, and when Howard is talking about his daughter, Megan, and you start thinking, you're just a weird survivalist guy, but you aren't an evil guy. And then you start feeling like really sorry for him and thinking, hang on, you're being cruel to someone who's being kind to you. So it's a very nuanced performance. You do feel sorry for him at points.
You really do. Yeah, you really do. Like, I remember watching it for the first time and genuinely not knowing, from one scene to the next, what was going on with this guy. And that's a really fun thing, especially, and we'll get to this, but like the fact that it is called Cloverfield, that kind of plants in your head that that's even the title Cloverfield suggests that there must be something going on in the outside world because it's a Cloverfield film, right? Yeah. So that also then plants the seed of like, well, he's probably telling the truth, So there's that angle as well, which is really interesting, you know. And again, maybe that's a weakness for some people in a way that it's a Cloverfield film and that is revealed, but
but it does add to the nuance, doesn't it? And
yes.
So there's a good bit where she has realised quite early on that he's run her off the road. But he then confesses to doing that. He says, I need to tell you that I did do that, but it was because I was panicked.
Yes.
I didn't mean to run you off the road.
Yeah.
And then you think, oh, okay, well, maybe he didn't mean to. Maybe he didn't plan for her to be there at all and was just rushing to get home and then felt bad because he'd hurt this woman. So to be able to maintain that through most of the film, it's pretty clever.
John Goodman is such a good actor, isn't he? And he's like, I don't know what he's most well known for these days. Maybe sort of Coen Brothers films or something, I guess. But like, he's very good at that sort of. You don't quite know whether he's going to be because he's imposing looking, I suppose. Right? He's a big man, but often you never know whether he's going to be somebody threatening, malevolent, somebody really, or somebody cuddly and friendly. You just don't know. And I think often some of his best roles kind of. Tread that line, don't they? Even Barton Fink and stuff like that, do that really well, I think. He's great.
I mean, there's a lovely bit in it, which I hadn't remembered, when they're playing, I don't know what the game's called, but...
Oh, yeah. Well, like a sort of... It's like an articulate type game, isn't it? Yeah.
Where Emmett's trying to describe Little Women, so and he points at... He gets John Goodman's character, Howard, to say little, and then he's like, oh, and Michelle is one of these, and he says girl... And can't, and so Emmett says, "Oh no, like older," and he is running out of time and goes, "Oh, princess, little princess," and it's like that's fucking weird.
That's so weird. That is one of the creepiest Howard
really
moments.
Creepy. It's like that's really weird.
He cannot see her as a woman.
No, so that gives you like so much insight into that character.
Yes,
but it still doesn't mean like it's like, well, okay, you can't even entertain the concept of her being a woman, but what does that mean? Like,
right, exactly. And I guess like in some ways, and just please do correct me if I'm wrong in here thinking this, but like it feels like there's not so much, considering it's her in a bunker with two men, there doesn't seem to be so much a sexual threat, because it feels like he clearly is weird and he wants to kidnap her but almost treat her as like a daughter figure rather than anything else, right?
Right, so yeah. And which makes that seem really interesting, because it's like, so I think that the presence of the sexual threat is always there. Yes. And I think that's just because he is a woman with two men in a bunker. Yes. Like, that's constantly there, that's always in the back of our mind. But that scene is like, well, one, that's really creepy, but two, is it though? Because is it that you see yourself as a father figure to her?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So maybe that isn't creepy, although it is creepy.
Well, it is creepy because also you think this is a guy who spent his whole life thinking about survival. And I remember when I first saw it thinking, oh, he deliberately wanted a woman in that bunker in case the world ends and he needs to repopulate or something in his like deranged
but that's the
head.
Thing. But maybe he does.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a lovely little bit of nuance.
It's so good, isn't it? Because there's so much that is not laid out for you. I mean, even in time. So let's talk about, like I said, we can go full spoilers. What is Howard's real MO? Is it that he lost his daughter, or that he lost contact with his family and he's since been basically kidnapping women? Because we find out there was another woman before Michelle, right?
Right. That's
to
right.
sort of keep as sort of weird surrogate daughters or something.
Yeah,
is
maybe.
Is that what you think?
I don't know. I mean, so the woman before, was younger, in fact, because I think Emmett says that, she disappeared from like high school or college or something.
Yeah, yeah.
But of course, Emmett pretends that she is his daughter, and there's a picture that you see of the two of them where he's got his arm around her, in a slightly fathery way. So yeah, it's possible that that's what he's doing, that he's reliving like what's going on there, really.
Yeah. But he is of course like a wrong-un, right? I mean, he's not actually this kind of like friendly, harmless guy that maybe the film suggests he is in the first act, right? Because of course then we do see him shoot and kill Emmett and melt his body in acid.
What a moment though that is, when he's like, Emmett takes the rap for, he's obviously found the equipment and that they're using to try and build this hazmat suit. Emmett takes the rap and Howard says, "I forgive you," and then shoots him in the face.
Oh, chilling. Ooh. It's really chilling.
Yeah.
Let's briefly talk about Emmett as well before we go on. What do you think of Emmett as a character, as like the sort of the third wheel in this kind of weird group?
Again, fascinating, because early on, so John Gallagher Jr. Later starred in Short Term 12.
Oh yeah,
which is a great film.
Great film.
And his character is lovely. Like he's a good guy.
Yes.
But that came after 10 Cloverfield Lane, and when I saw 10 Cloverfield Lane, I didn't know that. And there's something a bit scruffy and a bit wrong about him. So watching it now, I'm like, oh, that's lovely. You Short Term 12. But then I did not think that. Then I'm like, well, what's your deal? And also, are you in league with Howard?
That's interesting.
Like, are you lying? Like, what's going on here? And yeah, you're closer in age and seem to have a bond with Michelle. But are you fucking with her? Are you both fucking with her? Like,
yes. Oh my God. I didn't even think that actually.
Well, it just messes with you a bit.
Yeah,
like,
it does. It does.
Later you like him and later you do trust him. But earlier on, because it's a genre film. So earlier on you're like, what? Who
can I trust? What's his deal?
What is his deal?
I think it's funny, isn't it? Because I think when I first watched it, I was really grateful. Watching this from a male perspective, maybe, so I'm not maybe thinking about it in the same way you are, but I was kind of grateful for him as her ally in a way against John Goodman, because we didn't know exactly what was going on with John Goodman, and I thought, well, at least he seems all right, But again, like, there is that mystery around him as well. Yeah. And
as far as I can recall, I think in the original script that they're both a bit more predatory.
That's interesting.
Which was it's a very good script, but it's less comfortable and less nuanced and a bit nastier.
Yeah.
Whereas having him be actually a pretty nice guy, like still in the first act, I don't think you know that.
No, you don't.
Like, but later on, it's like this is actually a bit like. Because the film was very tense, but you don't want it to be unbearably horrible from start to finish, because that's not what that film is. That's not the tone of that film.
Well, that's really interesting, isn't it? Let's talk about the tone, because there is, like you say, like in theory, when you read this story on paper, it could sound like some sort of horrible abduction, thriller, torture porny type movie, but it's not that at all, is it? Like, it feels, I remember from my first screening, there was quite a lot of laughter, even, the kind of awkwardness of them playing board games and that kind of thing,
Yeah, well, that's right. Yeah. And there are points at which, like, they're kind of friends, all three of them, and they're kind of like, washing up and cooking, cleaning, setting the table, and kind of
like
trying
a sort of
to have
weird family almost. Yeah.
Right. Or like there's a bit where, I can't remember exactly what the context was, but John Goodman's dancing a little bit because they've got the jukebox, and but it plays with you. Another reason I love it so much is that it lets you have these moments of calm, and then we'll throw something shocking at you, so that Michelle particularly can never relax. Like, she's just constantly on her toes, even when things are nice. They might be about to be horrible.
I know. It's so good, isn't it? The way that it casts the seed of doubt every time you think you can relax into knowing what's going on. It's like, oh, suddenly they'll hear a noise outside. Like, oh, something's happening above ground, and that kind of thing.
And Goodman's like, oh, it's going to be this or it's going to be that, because I can tell the difference.
Yeah.
And we're like, can you?
Yeah.
But also, the fact, as you pointed out before, the fact that it is a Cloverfield film keeps you on your toes even more, because it, so in the second act, it's like, oh no, they're sort of being like a family. Oh, so is what's going to happen now that they're going to get attacked by aliens?
I know.
And and the answer is no.
Yeah.
But it could have been.
It could have
turned into a different thing altogether.
And this really clever thing that it does ultimately, which is what you said in your synopsis, which is like, is it real, global problems going on here, pandemic, alien invasion? Is it him lying, or is it both? And actually it turns out to be both.
It's both,
right?
Yeah.
As well. So she's kind of screwed either way, which makes this quite a scary thing. But it's like, that's a really fun thing, again, that keeps you getting to the very last act, I think.
Yeah, and
so good.
And you're right, that is of course even more relevant during a pandemic, because in our kind of the back of my mind now, you're thinking about these poor people who are locked in with people with abusive partners or whatever, that it's like it can be both.
Yes.
And both is the worst. It's the worst thing that, someone's gaslighting you, or no, he's not in fact gaslighting her, but he is taking advantage of a horrible global situation to do something terrible.
Yeah. Exactly. There's that horrifying, like I any claustrophobic scenes make me kind of like, but the vents, right? Oh my God.
That's unbearable.
That's a turning point as well, isn't it? Because that's when she sees the note on the window, the
right.
message.
And he's like, Howard says to her that she's the smallest, which is why she has to do it. And he says, if you get stuck, we won't be able to come in and help you. Don't get stuck. And it's just horrible moment of her squeezing herself into this little vent to try and sort out the air conditioning. Yeah.
And of course, then when she reads that message on the window saying help or whatever, that no one has ever, like John Goodman can never have seen that because he can't get in there, right, as well. So, and that's the first moment when everything shifts again. And you're like, okay. And
then you realise that, of course, the picture isn't of his daughter because of the earring found. Yeah. And then it's like, okay, we're now into some pretty hot water.
Yeah, we're in proper horror territory, aren't we? And that's it. Like, it then does become... Because actually, I mean, let me to ask you, like, the very basic question. Do you think this movie is scary? Do you find it kind of scary in that conventional horror way?
Yeah, actually. I do think it's scary.
I do as well.
I mean, it's not like ghostly scary, but I found it very, very tense. Yeah. And like, there were shocks and there were moments of the whole acid stuff, which is like, and it gets more and more intense towards the end when he's like, half his face is burnt off and he's coming to get her and she's got to get
He's gone full villain by that point.
Yes. Yeah, he's become the monster.
The monster. Yeah, you're so right. And that, like you say, that shock moment when he just shoots Emmett in the head and he barely even sort of reacts or emotes to what he's just done. He's so cold all of a sudden. You go, oh my, that's a real shock moment. And it's done so well, isn't it? Where like, this is links to A Quiet Place, but there's that moment when it's like almost like everything goes quiet after he shoots that gun, like it's like, perforated her ears or something, and it's just that pure shock moment at that point. Because it's directed by, we haven't mentioned, have we, but it's directed by Dan Trachtenberg, and I think I'll have to double check this, but I think it's his first feature film.
It is his first feature film.
Yeah.
He directed my favourite Black Mirror, which was Playtest.
Which one was Playtest?
So it's really, really horror-y. It's Russell Wyatt is the main star, and it's the gaming one.
Amazing. And it's got a big spider.
It's got loads of really scary horror moments. So obviously he's a man who really understands horror and that sort of tension. But yes, I believe you're right that this was his first feature. And what a feature.
Right. I mean, this is kind of cliche from everything we've said, really, but he's done an amazing job, hasn't he, of directing? Because I think it's I guess there's always that kind of slight cliche that if you have a film that is basically a single location with 3 actors, it could potentially come across as a bit play-like or uncinematic. But this film never feels like that, does it, really?
No, not at all. And I mean, like, again, the way he uses the structure of the bunker, because although it can't be that big, there are different bits
rooms
and places and rooms and there's bits with the plants and then the vents and all this. So for a single location and 3 actors, he really just drags everything out of that. So good.
And also that sort of like tonal management, as we talked about, where you are chuckling or laughing or awkward or sad or terrified from one minute to the next as well.
And then always the constant looming little glimpses of outside, little sounds of outside, which is still present there all the time. Like, what's the fucking, what's going on out there?
What's happening? It's so good, isn't it? It's something that I've found a lot in all the films I've been talking about, the kind of alien invasion films. I've been a much bigger fan of the ones that are more contained. So, and I suppose those are the ones that are more horror, but less this kind of like global scale, let's see what's going on in the White House, let's see what's going on in the Pentagon, but actually like, even if you take something like Signs, where it's like a family in a farmhouse and all from their perspective, I much prefer that kind of storytelling.
Like give me The Thing over Independence Day.
Exactly.
Every day of the week.
Yeah, exactly. And this is like the absolute kind of quintessential version of that in a way, isn't it? Yeah. All right, we've got to talk about the final act then, and the kind of the actual Cloverfieldiness of it, right?
Yeah.
Let me ask you, what was your reaction when you first saw it? Do you remember did you have expectations in your head? Did you think that you knew this was going to turn out to be what it was? Like, what were your reactions when you first saw this final scene when she gets to the outside world and sees the aliens?
So, as far as I can recall from watching it, so before I was going in, it's like, oh, it's definitely an alien thing. Blah, blah. But then I was really caught up in it. Yeah. So I didn't really have time to think what's going to happen at the end
true.
because I was just really, really into it. Mm-hmm. So then when she gets out, it's like, okay, and she sees a ship or something in the distance. And she says something like, oh, come on.
Yeah, it's so good. Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah. Then it's like, oh, okay, this is the Cloverfield bit. Where are we going with this? Now, I have to say, I understand why they did it. I don't think it works at all.
Right, that's really interesting. So tell me, because you mentioned this earlier, you read the original script.
Yes.
That was quite different. Is it that this alien stuff was never in the original script?
Not at all, no. Absolutely nothing to do with that. So what it was to do with was some sort of plague. It was the three-hander of those two characters. The characters were slightly different. But it's not that different in the sense that it still has the same question of, is it a plague?
Yes.
Is he a weirdo? Or is it both?
Yeah.
And the end of the script is to do with him talking about his daughter and stuff like that. Like, it's really quite nuanced. The script is genuinely very good. It's different, and I do think this version is slightly better, but it has a similar level of nuance all the way through. Yeah, there is a bit of messiness to it, isn't there, at the end, that you can feel the mechanics, I suppose, of them making it a Cloverfield film. Right, and Damien Chazelle rewrote the one that I read.
Right, yeah.
But he didn't add the alien stuff into it. That wasn't him.
Right. Oh my God.
In fact, I don't think he even knew, because I interviewed him not about this, but I wanted to bring it up because I'm quite fascinated by this.
So Damien Chazelle, obviously, for people listening, this is Whiplash, La La Land director, right? And so by this point, he'd done Whiplash, but not yet done La La Land, I guess, 2016, or was on the cusp of doing La La Land.
I believe that he had not done Whiplash.
Right, so it's before.
Because I believe, and I could be wrong about this, but I believe that he was potentially going to direct this, but didn't, because he went off to do
Whiplash. Amazing.
But he'd probably already made the short of Whiplash, although I'm not 100% sure about that.
I mean, by the way, one of my favourite films of the last 10 years, Whiplash. Absolute masterpiece. But yeah, it's so interesting. So the script went through all these different stages, right? And of course, I think you can absolutely feel it. Everyone who watches it can feel it, I think, right? That it feels like it's maybe retroactively been made into a Cloverfield sequel, right?
It has, because it wasn't even called that. So, you remember the working title was Valencia.
Yes.
And we didn't know what that was. Nobody knew what it was.
Right. And actually, I haven't asked you this, but let me ask you a bit about the marketing, because again, we talked a lot about the marketing of the original Cloverfield. You, I'm guessing, were working as a film journalist at the time when this film was a thing, right? Do you remember kind of this whole thing where the trailer dropped, didn't it? Like at the very last minute, like right before the film came out and everything.
That's right. Yeah. And I remember because I think I had just maybe put to press a magazine which had Valencia in it, and I was like, only a tiny entry, but it's like, it's a Cloverfield movie. I didn't realise. So that was a big old shock, but a good shock, like
a really fun shock.
Yeah. So I was like, this is exciting, and then we finally get to see it, the ending, like, I don't think it works, but what J.J. Abrams was trying to do, who's obviously the creator and producer, was kind of create a series of films that almost like the Twilight Zone. So he was trying to get people to go and watch indie films that would be very loosely related. So he was trying to do a good thing here. He was trying to sort of call it a sequel, but it's not really a sequel. It's just an adjacent kind of movie, so that, because if you have, here's an original horror by people that you haven't necessarily heard of, directed by a first-timer called Zeller, like, how many people are going to go and see that? Whereas 10 Cloverfield Lane, boom. So, he was trying to do something good. And so therefore, even though I don't think the ending works, because I think it's silly, quite honestly, when she throws the Molotov cocktail straight into his, like, that's out of character for me, for her. She's a normal person.
I know. And you're so right. And actually, like, that, like you said, is an amazing idea. This idea that Cloverfield isn't a, because you don't really understand what the word Cloverfield means, even in the first film.
No.
So that could be just the title of a anthology style series of films.
Right.
And it's so, in that regard, it could have still been a plague. It could have still been not aliens. And still been called Cloverfield.
It could. I think people would have felt a bit cheated if it hadn't been an alien. But I mean, the fact that it's called 10 Cloverfield Lane means we understand that this is domestic horror. So this is an address. So we aren't expecting, or I wasn't expecting it to be this global kind of thing. It's like, I understand that I'm getting domestic horror here.
We're in this one location. Yeah.
So while I wouldn't have minded if she'd got out and then she sees some aliens and then goes off and hears the message and goes to Houston, which happens at the very end.
Yes.
It's the whole alien attack that was like, oh, come on.
Yeah.
Come off it.
Like she says.
Well, like she says.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes, that's true. Like I was thinking to myself, like, would this have been better if it had been like you said, like she drives off and we see the UFOs or whatever, or if it had been even more ambiguous and it had literally been like, we never leave the bunker. Like she walks up the stairs, goes out the door, closes it, and we never see what happens to her almost, as well. And like if it had retained that sense of ambiguity, and I think everyone has their own views on how this particular film ends, but I think you're right. It doesn't quite work, and everything up until that point is so perfect, really, as like a little claustrophobic thriller, So
I just felt like her character, they kind of messed up a bit at the end,
Yeah, there's a great moment, again, and especially in a kind of pandemic context, when before she sees the aliens, but she gets outside, but she rips her suit, which is a very like a kind of, she's going to, get contaminated, she's going to breathe something in that she shouldn't, and all of that stuff is great. And it's funny because the pandemic thing is kind of different to the alien thing, isn't it? And I remember thinking this the first time I watched it, going, well, there was no talk of pandemic stuff in the first film. That wasn't linked to an alien invasion. So what is the deal here,
Right. And so it also has a bit, when she first gets out, she sees the birds and takes her mask off. So we're still doing, hey, what is it?
Yes.
Which is great. We're still on our toes at this point.
Yeah.
And then you see the alien spaceship, and then the alien spaceship sprays the green poison and like that.
Yeah.
Is that a thing they do now?
Yes. But also, and again, I don't know how long it's been since you've seen Cloverfield, but the aliens themselves look entirely different to the aliens in Cloverfield, I think, as well. Like, you can't really make out, because the whole point is that you're watching it through this insanely shaky camera, but actually the look of the alien, I think, is very different in these two films as well. So it's still not entirely clear if what we're watching is a sequel taking place in the same world or just another alien story. Just, So that's really interesting. And actually, I've got to say, I haven't seen, I don't know whether you have, the Cloverfield Paradox.
I have.
I've heard not good things.
It's not good. It's not good. I mean, it's terrible.
It's such a shame.
It's a shame because that kind of killed that franchise.
It's killed it. And it could have been an amazing franchise.
I know. And so with that, if you remember, the trailer dropped and then the film landed in its entirety.
And that had a different title too, didn't it? I remember, again, working as a film. The God Particle, exactly. With an amazing cast.
Amazing
cast.
This
film sounds great.
Yeah. But it's quite the nonsense. I mean, I quite enjoyed it, but it is nonsense.
Yes.
And that tied in, that had a kind of a alternate universe type thing going on. It was very ambitious, completely different kind of film, but people didn't really like it. And of course, it landed on Netflix straight away.
Yeah,
and I think
didn't even get a cinema release.
Nope.
Yeah.
And do you remember there was something called Overlord?
Yes.
And people thought that was going to be Cloverlord.
Oh, yeah.
And then it wasn't. But I don't know whether
whether it was supposed to be.
Yeah, or whether they changed their minds about that.
That's interesting. I wouldn't be surprised, because that was a J.J. Abrams thing too, wasn't it?
It was,
Overlord.
which is why it was like, hang on a minute.
Yeah.
You've done that twice before, so...
It's such a shame, isn't it? So do you think that's it? Do you think there's a future for the Cloverfield franchise, I wonder? I mean, it's one of those things where we'll never know, because they don't announce it until it happens.
Well, exactly. So anything's possible.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I think the place where we were, where it was Cloverfield and then 10 Cloverfield Lane, both successful, critically acclaimed, both theatrical releases, and maybe we can do this amazing world. I don't think post... Cloverfield, what's it called again? Paradox.
Cloverfield Paradox, yeah.
I don't see that being resurrected. I don't see people paying lots of money to go and see a Cloverfield film in the cinema, unless it's like a reboot of some sort. But
yes, exactly. Or even if it's a good film that will just come out on Netflix, that's one thing, isn't it? But it's such a shame, because it's such a cool idea, and I really like this kind of mystery box style storytelling that J.J. Abrams is really into. That kind of Lost thing as well, like that thing where you don't. you don't even know what it is, and the marketing plays into that it's not revealing to you what it is you're about to go see and everything.
That's the thing. I really like that as well.
Yeah.
And it really worked for me with 10 Cloverfield Lane, but then suddenly Paradox comes out and it's like,
Yeah. There you go. And, usually I'd ask, does this film sort of hold up? But it's only 5 years old, 2016. But do you think this film holds up? I mean, we've talked about it. Even in a post-pandemic kind of context, does it hold up well for you, would you say?
Oh, yeah. I mean, apart from the ending, which I still don't think works, I think it's great. I genuinely think it's a really, really good film with a really tight script, brilliant performances all round that still, even though I know what's going to happen at the end, made me really tense. The bit with the acid was just amazing. There was just so many little moments that I hadn't remembered that are still just like perfect. So yes, very much so.
Absolutely perfect. I agree. Absolute banger. One of my favourites of recent years. I loved it. Hello everybody, just interrupting this week's episode momentarily to thank this week's sponsor. That's $20 Patreon subscriber Casket Clap. That's what they call themselves, at least. Casket Clap. They sent me a little message that I will read for you now. Casket Clap says, "Hello there, horror enthusiasts. Most importantly, I want to thank you, Mr. Munzer, for putting together such a wonderful podcast. The soothing British accents paired with the wide array of fantastic movies and top-notch guests are such a delight. It's fascinating, informative, thought-provoking, and it keeps me entertained and sane while navigating the DC, Virginia area traffic, which can be rather horrific. Very quickly, I'll go ahead and plug my online store, GrapeStation. GrapeStation specialises in a wide variety of collectibles, Funko Pops, vinyl LPs, comics, cassettes, in addition to tons of horror-related items from movies featured on this very podcast. I sell through the Mercari app, which I believe is only available in the USA, but if you live outside of the US or prefer to shop direct, be sure to give me a follow on Instagram at CasketClap. I post my daily arrivals and inventory there as well. All items are packed with extreme care and ship the same or next day with tracking. For your first purchase, be sure to mention the secret code Absolute Banger to take 50% off any horror-related items in the store. Thank you so much again, Mike, and take care. Wow, amazing. Thank you so much to $20 Patreon subscriber Casket Clap for all of his kindness and generosity there. And I'm just checking out some of your stuff on your store, GrapeStation. Amazing. There is a Jason Voorhees Funko Pocket Pop keychain that I want desperately. This looks incredible. I'm going to have to order myself one of these. So this is amazing. If you want to check out some of his awesome horror merch, then absolutely check out his store or his Instagram account. I will list these details in the show notes. One more time, a huge thank you to this week's sponsor, $20 Patreon subscriber, Casket Clap. And if you want to become an official Evolution of Horror sponsor like Casket Clap and get your own little segment in the middle of an episode on the main feed, then you've just got to sign up to our Patreon, patreon.com/Evolution of Horror.
Hello?
Hello, Anna.
Mike, what's with the voice?
Do you like scary movies?
You know I do, Mike.
Do you like scary podcasts about scary movies?
What is happening? What's with the weird questions?
Because I'm right outside your door with my podcasting mic.
Why didn't you just ring the doorbell?
I'm not sure. I just thought this would be cool, to be honest.
This is a recording studio, Mike. Please just stop and get in. We have a podcast to make.
That ridiculous little skit you just heard there was from another podcast that I am currently producing and hosting called Hello Sydney. This is a Scream podcast supported by Paramount Pictures in anticipation of the brand new Scream film, Scream 5, but of course it's just called Scream, which is finally being released in cinemas and theatres in the next couple of weeks. So if you want to hear me and Anna Bogutskaya and Louise Blaine discuss each and every Scream movie in depth, you can now listen to the first 4 episodes in which we discuss Scream 1, 2, 3 and 4 in depth. So subscribe now to Hello Sydney. You can find that podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and I will link to it in the show notes. And next week we will be discussing the much anticipated Scream 2022. So if you want to be the first to hear our thoughts on that, then subscribe now. That's Hello Hello Sydney, a Scream podcast, and you can get that wherever you get your podcasts.
Well, you know, I really wear these makeups because I don't want people to think I'm just another pretty face. You see, I'm really, this is my real soul underneath this. Of course, it's a black comedy, as they are called, and consequently you try to play things for comedy and with a bit of good taste, but it's awfully hard to saw somebody's head off with the very best of taste. Even though I have taken carving lessons, I'm very good on a mutton roast or something.
That was a little clip you just heard there from an interview with the incredible, the horror legend that is Vincent Price. And that is a little hint of what we've got coming up this month over on Patreon, because it's a new year and we're kicking off a brand new mini season. This was chosen by patrons. We are going to be launching a mini season called Legends of Horror. Each episode in this mini season, we are going to be taking a different legend of the genre, whether that's a famous writer like Stephen King or H.P. Lovecraft, a famous director like James Whale or Toby Hooper, a famous producer like Roger Corman, or a famous actor like Peter Cushing or Vincent Price. So episode 1, we are going to be kicking off with Vincent Price. We're going to be talking about the life and career of Vincent Price, and then we're going to be listing some of our favourite films of his, and we're going to end that episode with a deep dive discussion of Theatre of Blood, one of his best movies and his best performances from 1973. So that is going to be available very soon for $10 Patreon subscribers. $10 Patreon subscribers will get access to all of our exclusive mini-seasons, including the Legends of Horror and our globe-trotting international horror series, which kicked off in December, and episode 2 of that will also be dropping very soon. You'll also have access to our Saw mini-season, our Hitchcock mini-season, and our Hellraiser mini-season. All of those are still available. Patreon.com/evolution of horror. A donation of $10 per month will get you access to all of these bonus episodes, and you'll receive a new episode every single week. $5 per month will also get you access to a whole bunch of bonus episodes, just not our mini-seasons. But if you want to go up to the highest tier, that's $20 per month, and that will get you absolutely everything, as well as make you an official Evolution of Horror sponsor, in which you get your own little segment in the middle of an episode like Casket Clap did this week. So patreon.com/evolution of horror. Sign up now at either a $5, $10 or $20 tier and get different benefits accordingly. But everybody who signs up, no matter what tier you're in, will get a very special shout out on the podcast as a thank you. Speaking of, I'm going to give everybody who signed up in the last couple of weeks a very special thanks. So a big thank you to Charles Ventura, Ben, Zach Anderson, Emil Hedman, Joel Fennis, Cheryl Rich, Kim Babb, Kit F, Robert Evans, Eddie, Hilary Owen, Whitney L. Stutes, Jacob Lifton, Jacob B, Justin Shilhanek, Jack Ian Henderson, Chris Freiberg, Ajar Kiri, and Sarah Callan McKee. A huge thank you to all of those people for signing up to our Patreon in the last couple of weeks. And one more time, if you want to join them and get treated to regular bonus content, then sign up now. Patreon.com/evolution of horror. That's patreon.com/evolution of horror. Okay, let's return to the second half of this week's episode, in which Rosie Fletcher and I discuss the very last Alien movie of the series. This is John Krasinski's A Quiet Place from 2018.
Who are we if we can't protect them? We have to protect them.
So, A Quiet Place is set in a world where, for reasons we don't know, aliens have invaded the planet, I believe. And although actually, we'll come to that a bit, certainly invaded America.
Yes, we don't actually, again, it's very contained. Well, we don't necessarily know, do we?
We don't. And there's some things in Quiet Place 2.
Yes.
But we'll come to that.
Yes.
So these creatures navigate entirely by sound. So they will, and they're completely violent. We have no sense of what they want or why. There's no kind of rhyme or reason to them. but they don't see. They are attracted purely by sound. So when we join the film, I can't remember what day it is, but it's been a bit.
Yeah.
I think it's like day 89 or something like that.
Yeah.
So our main family, which is John Krasinski, Emily Blunt, Noah Jupe, and Millicent Simmons, and the other child.
And the poor other child.
And the other child have managed to survive, partly because Millicent Simmons' character, who's called Reagan, but I don't think that's ever mentioned in the film, is deaf. And so the family can already communicate very effectively using sign language, which is how they've managed to sort of survive. So they've got... so at the beginning, in the pre-credit sequence, we see them at a pharmacy getting supplies, and the small child takes a toy which makes noise and is killed quite brutally. It's a pretty strong opener,
Oh my
I would
God,
say.
a toddler getting brutally killed in the opening scene.
It's like,
yes.
Okay, wow. And also bear in mind, in that opening scene, nobody speaks. There's no dialogue at all. And in fact, there was very little dialogue, spoken dialogue, throughout the whole film. So then we cut to day 472, where the family, minus small dead child,
Yes.
are like living quite successfully in this remote farmhouse, and they've put in lots of kind of things so that they can go about their lives silently. And Emily Blunt's character is heavily pregnant.
Yes.
Which I do want to talk about.
Yes.
So that's where we find them, and the action takes place over a day or two. I think. It's pretty confined.
It's literally like the rest of the movie is like a trip out with the kids goes badly, basically, right?
Just like the worst night ever after that.
Yeah, exactly.
Essentially, that's right. Yeah.
I think this movie actually came out post me and you knowing each other, Rosie. I think we saw this at the same screening, if I recall rightly, in Dolby.
Dolby, yes.
Yeah, right? What an amazing place to see a film like this as well,
God,
right?
Yeah.
But what did you think of A Quiet Place?
And when I first saw it, I absolutely loved it.
Me too.
I found it so stressful, though. Like, when I came out, I was quite shaky and was like, I need to sit down for a moment.
Yes.
Like, partly because it's quite emotionally charged.
It really is. Yeah.
And because of the sound, and of course we'll talk about the sound, it keeps you really tense all the way through. Keeps you on your toes. Even watching it again, I was jumping here and jumping there.
Yes.
So yes, I really, really, really liked it when it first came out, and I found it stressful in all the best possible ways.
Yes, exactly. I couldn't agree more. I loved it when I first watched it it's true. It's like, it's the absolute epitome of that thing that a lot of people kind of don't like, which is that sort of quiet bang horror film, right? Isn't it? But it's so good because I think exactly like you said, it's very emotionally... It's quite devastating in a lot of ways. I think you become so emotionally invested in this family, and the performances are also good, that it is as upsetting as it is scary, I think.
It really is, because it's got this subplot, which is essentially Reagan, Millicent Simmons' character, because she gave the toy to her little brother, she blames herself.
Yes.
But because her dad, Lee, he doesn't blame her, but he's distant with her.
Yeah,
and I think he's trying to protect her. And so, as well as there's a bunch of aliens, you also have this kind of terrible through line of her just feeling intense guilt and feeling like maybe her dad doesn't love her. Yeah. Which is fucking horrific, quite honestly.
It is. The children are, like we've talked about in the plot synopsis, the children are put through it in this film, aren't they? That's the thing.
They really are. And I mean, so there are several moments in it which I really found like really emotionally powerful, particularly with her, where she's a young teen and she's really upset and she wants to scream but she can't. So it's this silent crying, not being able to even make the noise that she needs to make. And also a lot of the time we are in her head. Yeah. When we're in her head, there's no sound at all. So you sort of do feel for her and really, you know, as if it's not bad enough to be living in the world of aliens. You feel this intense guilt and you think your dad doesn't love you.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's really sad. It's like, yes, like you said, like stressful is the perfect word. Yeah. It's a stressful watch the first time you see it, but in all the right ways. I feel like there's a little bit of almost kind of sniffiness about this film now. Have you found that? Like, I feel like people... I don't know, maybe it's because there is that sort of slight sort of Spielberg-y almost kind of sentimentality about this film. I think a lot of people do sort of turn their noses up at this film, and horror fans turn their noses up at this film too, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right, but I don't really understand that. Like,
No.
I genuinely think it's a really good film.
It's really good.
I mean, there are a couple of things. So, like, there are a couple of plot, not holes, but niggles.
Yes.
And those things are quite easy to take the piss out of.
Right.
So I wonder if that might have some element of,
Yes. So do you mean like this whole idea that, any tiny amount of noise means you're dead, basically, and that there are things that kind of, like, what about the fact that nature makes noises and waterfall and wind and everything else?
It's more like, so, it's like, so a plot point in the film, of course, is that Lee takes his son to the waterfall and says, you can talk while we're at the waterfall because it's like noise that's louder than us. So then we go, why don't you take your wife to the waterfall when she's having a baby then?
Yes.
Which is a fairly obvious point. And it's like, yes, all right, but his wife and baby are going to live next to a waterfall. Like, so yes, that is a fair point. Or from my mind, it's like, hang on a minute, you've missed a trick here, because if ambient noise that's constant and doesn't change, you can make noise from, then what you need to do is not be quiet, is be very,
really
very noisy.
loud.
So basically set up a stereo system with a really good generator so that you're playing really, really loud music. Set it up remotely so that you aren't there. So the creatures come and attack initially, and then they just get used to it, and then you can move back to your house. And you have to listen to, loud music all the time, but then everyone can kind of go about the place and talk and...
That's a good point.
But that's not the film we're watching. It doesn't matter.
I know.
That would have been a silly film anyway.
It doesn't matter. Again, I had the same conversation when we talked about Signs, which, yes, it's ridiculous that they go to a planet full of water and their weakness is water, but whatever.
Yes, but it's not that film.
It's not that film. It's fine. And I think there's so much that is so good about this film. And watching it again, I was really appreciating just the sort of economy of directing and writing in this film. Like you said, that incredible opening scene that literally tells us everything we need to know by not telling us anything, right? Just that trip to the shop, buying that toy, the alien killing that toddler immediately when any noise was made, and that's it. And it's like, everything you need to know from that sequence, don't you? It's so good.
100%. Also, like the war room that they have in the basement.
Yes.
Also gives you really good, quick shorthand at like what's been going on, what's he been doing, what have they looked into,
Although
very sharp.
I've heard some people slag that off too and say it's like the exposition room. That's the thing. But it
is the exposition room. But like, we're talking about a film where people communicate almost exclusively in sign.
Yeah.
Where there would be absolutely no reason to have any exposition between that family because they all completely understand each other.
Yeah.
So like, I think if you're going to do it, doing it in a silent way.
Exactly, I agree.
I don't want like a fucking news report, because also why would they,
exactly.
And also why are people still doing news reports? They wouldn't be
exactly, and you wouldn't have them talking to each other even via sign about like what's been going on or whatever. They talk about each other. They communicate only when they absolutely have to. Basically, this family, don't they? Yeah. So let's talk about that group of performers as well. John Krasinski, who directed the film, right, as well as starred in it, and then Emily Blunt, obviously, and these two amazing kids. But what do you think of this kind of little family unit generally and these actors?
Yeah, I mean, like, so obviously Emily Blunt and John Krasinski are married in real life, and they have like great chemistry.
They really do.
Yes, and the kids are particularly brilliant. Heartbreaking, really, because you have the younger kid, played by Noah Jupe. He's the guy in, did you watch The Undoing?
Yes. Oh, he's the kid.
Yeah, he's the kid in that.
That puts the like murder weapon in the dishwasher or whatever.
He's the murder kid. He wasn't actually a murderer, but who is he? I can't remember. Anyway, no, he's not.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's really good. He's like a real up and comer. He's been in loads of good stuff. I think he was in The Night Manager as well.
Right. Yeah.
But he's really good. And so he's this younger kid. So there's a weird... So everyone's great in it, to answer your actual question. Absolutely. But there's a weird patriarchal structure to that family.
Yeah.
So that the parents have very traditional gender roles, but which is slightly subverted with the kids, because it's the girl who wants to go out with the dad and learn how to hunt. Mm-hmm. The boy does not. He's very frightened. But the dad makes the boy go with him.
Yes.
And he says, so that you can take care of mum,
Yes.
And it's like, okay, what's going on here? And that's quite an interesting arc, that the dad has to sort of not do that. And then Emily Blunt's character becomes very capable, and it's the daughter that really saves the day in the end. So that was quite an interesting journey, I think.
I agree with you. What do you like there? I have kind of since read criticisms or just comments on this film that it is in a way quite sort of conservative in its portrayal of these characters and its themes and that kind of thing. There's an article in Vanity Fair actually from last year called "John Krasinski Doesn't Agree with the Conservative Read on A Quiet Place," and it's some of his own responses to this. But I don't know, and not necessarily whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but what do you think of that and that read of this film?
Yeah, so you sent me a link the other day, which I had a look at, and I think that article it pushes it a bit too far.
Right.
Because there are bits in that article that I thought, no. So
they almost blame it for being like, they almost accuse it of sort of commenting on cancel culture and stuff, and like sort of saying that like people are being silenced and, you know, all this kind of thing. Yeah,
suggesting that the white people are frightened of this of
saying
dark forces. But I don't think that's I don't think that's what John Krasinski was saying.
No.
I think the complaint that writers made about the two people who kill themselves shout and scream rather than give messages of love, but it's like, yeah, all right, but the first one, he's killing himself because his wife's dead, so who's he going to shout a message of love to? And the second one, the whole point is that his daughter is deaf, so you know, he's told her, both of them, that he loves them, and he shouts because he's in immediate danger. So I don't think that doesn't feel like a fair criticism to me.
No.
I don't know anything about John Krasinski's politics. I mean, I don't think having a reading like that is a problem.
No.
You know, people should, you know, any kind of discourse is always interesting.
Absolutely,
and also not what I took from it.
And also, any kinds of characters are interesting. And I think you're right. Like there is a slight old-fashioned patriarchalness to this family, and it's, you know, I guess if you wanted to, you could say that this film is pretty pro-gun and various things like that. But like, it's all part of this post-apocalyptic world they're living in too. So even you can understand some of the decisions they're making in the world of this film, I guess, you know. It's
I mean, I mean, you're right though. It is kind of interesting, and it is this sort of like, you know, protect your family at all costs.
Yes. Which
I suppose in America at the minute is a slightly more, well, there's a bit more nuance to that. Yeah. You know, it's not a straightforward thing. So I mean, I guess there's an element of that, isn't there?
I think it's just like I think what it is, right, is that it's unabashedly old-fashioned, this film. Like it's very uncynical and quite earnest, and that maybe is just something we're not so used to. And maybe that's like going back to what we were talking about earlier, is why some people are a little bit sniffy about it. Again, there's that real kind of like, it wears its heart on its sleeve. It will make you cry. It's old school in its representation, I suppose, in a way, of this family. Even though it does slightly subvert it, like you say, with the kids, but maybe it's something about that to it that makes people think that it's so kind of it's old-fashioned Hollywood in a way, I suppose. It
is, and I mean, rewatching it with that in mind, you know, obviously Emily Blunt spends a lot of the movie literally barefoot and pregnant.
Yes, she does.
So, and then there's also the question of, so we're in day 472, right?
Yeah,
that's longer than a pregnancy, obviously. So they've chosen to get pregnant during an alien invasion, which is like, that's not very responsible.
Well, this is one of the big criticisms that so many people talked about. It was like, why on earth did they decide to have a baby in the middle of this post-apocalyptic world? Yeah, that is a problem, isn't it? Was that a problem for you when you first watched it, do you think, too?
It was, because I just thought, why did you make it that number of days?
Yes.
Why could she not already have been pregnant? Why didn't you just make it a shorter number of days?
Yes.
Because it did feel like, is he trying to say that she's got pregnant to replace the child that's killed?
I think so.
But that doesn't speak very nicely to...
No.
Like, babies will cry.
Yeah, I know.
And why would you want to bring a child into this pretty hellish world that's not going to be fun for children?
And also it's one of the weakest sequences, I think, in the film too, which is the sequence where she's in labour in the bath, because they do have to literally just kind of brush past the whole actual having the baby part, don't they? You know, she's in labour, and then the next time we see her, she's cradling the baby, and the baby's not crying, and everything's fine. And well, not fine, but they're alive. You know.
Yeah. So watching it again, and to be clear, I really do like the film.
Yeah.
But that sequence, because I hadn't remembered how many things happen and in what a short amount of time.
Yes, right.
So basically, imagine there were no aliens. You've still got basically the worst night because she stood on the nail, which is just unbearable.
The nail.
She stepped on a nail. Now she's having a baby. Now the laundry's overflowing and the house is flooded. And now the children are drowning in a grain silo.
Yes.
Like, no aliens. That's a really rough night, right?
Yeah, that's
like,
so
all
true.
Of these things are going on. Like, oh my God, the laundry. Like,
yeah.
And almost the laundry is like, why
Yeah.
did we need that? I was just doing the laundry, but then I thought I'd have a quick baby.
I know.
I don't know. That felt like laying it on a bit thick.
Yes, it's laying on these amazing kind of scare sequences.
I mean, it did scare me.
But yes, you're right. It's one of those things, like you said at the beginning, like when you think about the logic, the internal world logic of this, maybe it doesn't hold up. Maybe that's a problem, you know. I don't know. But also, how good is that nail? Like, that's one of the things everyone remembers. And we all remember that nail, that Chekhov's nail, from the beginning. There's something quite Hitchcockian. I was thinking this about both films, actually. There's something quite kind of Hitchcockian about both films. I actually read an essay that somebody wrote, and I can't remember now, I can't name who wrote it, but they talked about 10 Cloverfield Lane in comparison to Psycho, and this film that starts off with this woman on the run, and then it becomes an entirely different film where she ends up, kind of thing. And there's something kind of Hitchcockian about that nail, isn't there, I think, on the stairs in a quiet place.
And it's annoying, the nail.
Yeah.
But partly it's annoying because it's so uncomfortable when you're watching it.
Yes.
It's just there, like me, I'm like contorting my face because even watching it again, it's like, just do something with the nail.
Yeah.
It's so visceral. And again, like with her daughter, she can't scream.
Oh, it's so good.
I mean, again, great performance.
You really feel those moments, don't you?
You do. So she's silently kind of obviously in like intense pain.
Yes.
And then, but what's even more annoying is she drags her foot out of the nail and then leaves the nail there. And you think someone else is going to go on that nail.
Yeah, exactly. Remove the nail. It's so true. But yeah, you're so right. And actually, thank God the performances are all so good, because that's another, the film could have fallen apart, I suppose, if it wasn't for those incredible performances of these people just like desperate to scream, so much of the time, and they can't, and it's all in this silent, facial expression kind of acting, isn't it? It's so good.
Yeah.
Let me ask you about the aliens themselves as well. What do you think of the creature designs and the look of the aliens in this?
Well, I think they're quite good.
Yeah.
Although I think it's really difficult to design an alien these days.
You're right. Yeah, everything looks like something else, doesn't it?
Everything looks like something else. And also, like the really good aliens, like The Host, the Korean film.
Oh, yeah.
That's a good alien.
Yeah.
But like, I don't know if there's been, like, I don't think Clover was particularly iconic.
No, it wasn't. And it was a bit too Godzilla-like or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, and something like if they're too big, it doesn't quite work because you can't understand it.
No, funnily enough, I was talking, because I've been revisiting all these films, I really liked Attack the Block, because that was quite a different one. They were sort of hairy werewolf, kind of like almost with glowing teeth.
Yeah, almost occupying like negative space.
Yes.
That was pretty good.
It was quite different. Yeah.
But I thought what A Quiet Place did well was that it doesn't really let you see its aliens till really, really late on.
Right. Yeah.
So they're this threat that like are very fast and appears out of nowhere and then vanishes.
Yes.
Which is quite a clever thing. So I mean, I don't have a problem with them, but I don't think I've seen a really good alien design for quite a while.
No, it's true. I'm trying to think, like, it's really hard to live up to something like the design of the xenomorph in Alien or whatever, and it's like hard to find something that is as good as that, isn't it, as well?
Yeah. Because if it's too other, then it's just like, I'm not scared of that because what even is that? Yes. But then if it's not other enough, then it's too similar to some things.
Actually, I tell you what's amazing, but that I loved. Me and Louise Blaine recently talked about The Mist, Frank Darabont's The Mist.
Yes.
And you don't necessarily see the big creature in The Mist because of the mist.
Yeah.
But the little wasps that come in and the spiders and stuff. There's some amazing creature design in that.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
That scene in the pharmacy there is really... but it's because they're like insects, aren't they? So
yes.
You already feel frightened of them.
Like you said, it can't be too alien. That's the amazing thing about the xenomorph, isn't it? Because I think there's something about that face hugger that resembles a spider, and then obviously they all look like genitals.
I was going to say, it looks like a penis.
Yeah. Yeah.
we're all familiar with.
Everything looks like a penis or a vagina basically in those alien films. So they're all, there's something about them, isn't there? But yeah, you're right. And I think there's much more of a trend these days too, I suppose, in kind of not showing the monster quite so much for fear of it kind of not holding up or whatever. But I think you're right. I think these do look cool, and I love that quick glimpse you get of them here and there. So again, like going back to that opening scene, just the fact that we know that with that tiny bit of noise from that toy aeroplane, that thing leaps out of the bushes and it's gone in a split second is like all you need to know about them in a way, isn't it?
Yeah. It is a cracking opening scene, and it also immediately sets up that, look, that we've just killed a toddler, so don't assume that everybody's going to survive this.
Anyone can go, exactly. And which actually leads me on to that whole kind of really emotional scene, right, where the dad sacrifices himself as well. What did you think of that whole sequence? Like you said, after they've fallen in the grain, whatever it's called. What's that thing called?
It's called a grain silo.
A grain silo, yeah.
I know this because I know I digress, but I had a phobia of drowning in a grain silo as a child. Yes, and like when I try to explain this to my husband, he's like, "That's ridiculous. Just don't get in a grain silo." I'm like, yes, obviously, but like that's a real kind of thing.
That's brilliant.
Because I grew up in a village in Kent, and I remember like having like assemblies or whatever where people were like, "Don't get in a grain silo because you'll drown," and there might have been like videos about it or whatever. So seeing that, I'm like, oh, this is my nightmare.
That, my God, no wonder this film was so stressful for you then. It's like that on top of everything
the nail,
else.
And then the grain silo was like, come on.
But they've escaped the grain silo. Then they're in that car. They're about to be. And again, it feels something about it feels very Spielberg, don't you think? There's almost a Jurassic Park element of like.
Is it the lighting, do you think, partly?
Yeah, maybe it's the lighting. Yeah. And actually, we haven't talked about the score, which I want to ask you about. Yeah. But yeah, they're being attacked in the car. And then, of course, you know, John Krasinski's character, he kind of has to scream, sacrifice himself for his kids. Again, like, there's something quite earnest about it, but like, what do you think of that whole sequence? Because it got me when I first watched it.
Me too, absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's very in keeping with the themes of the movie, which is basically what would we do for our children? And there's a line that Emily Blunt says, which is like, if we can't protect them, then what are we? Right. So it felt right.
Yeah. You know? It did. And his little message to her, because like you said, there's been that tension between the two of them all the way through, or that distance, you know, and he tells her he loves her before he, you know, it's
I know, and then she goes down into the war room and she finds all the little hearing aids.
Yeah.
And like, that's unbearably sad.
Yeah, it is.
Because I think I don't think in the film it was supposed to be. I think it's like, oh, he did love me all along. But I'm like, yeah, now he's dead.
Now he's dead. Yeah, it is. It is really sad.
Yeah.
It is really sad. Let me ask you about the score, because this is something that I've always thought and gone back and forth about. But would this film have been better with almost no sound, you know, like with no score, with no big loud noises every time there's a jump scare, for example, you know?
Well, do you know what? It's impossible to say without seeing it, because I wondered that too, and actually remembering it versus watching it yesterday, I hadn't realised there was quite as much music as there is.
There is quite a lot. Yeah,
there is. But I wonder if they tried it without and it was just too much. But also then you wouldn't have had those scenes with inside Reagan's head.
And those are amazing as
which
well.
are amazing and really stand out. Whereas if it had only been like diegetic sound up until then, they wouldn't probably have had quite so much impact.
Yeah, that's true. There wouldn't have been that difference. Yeah. I know.
I wonder. I mean, I'd love to see that version. I really would. But, I suspect. I wonder if they tried it and then thought...
Well, I wonder that as well. And I know a lot of people kind of... Again, I remember reading critics' reviews, people saying that the score was too much. Again, there's that idea that it's that very kind of old school Spielberg-y Hollywood film where it's the score is so much loudly telling you what to feel in each scene in a film that is about no sound. So would it have been better without it? It's really hard to know because I do love those moments when we go into her head. It's so good, isn't it?
It's really good. But the score, as opposed to a lot of horror films, it's not a horror film score. Like it's quite sort of gentle, kind of lyrical, slightly romantic. It's not.
Yes.
It's not that.
Exactly. That's the other thing I think that makes it feel kind of a bit more old-fashioned. Like again, like if you think of the other films we were watching, even during that year, right? Films like Hereditary or whatever. There was something so kind of, I don't know, new and weird and creepy about them in this. And there's something about this that feels so much more like romantic is a good word in a way, like almost romantic as a horror film. Do you know what I mean?
I do. And I think, yes, I do. so it's, and that's interesting that you mentioned Spielberg, because I think you're right about that, and that hadn't really occurred to me. Because it's almost like when there is music, it's nice music and we know we're okay.
Yes.
We know we're safe.
Right.
As opposed to in most horror movies, when the music starts, you know you're not safe.
Yeah, that's true.
Whereas when it's silent here, you're not safe.
Yes.
So scenes where there's no music and it's just the family, someone's going to knock something over.
Something
they just are. Like, or tread on a nail, or like drowning a grain silo.
It's so true. Every time it's like the Monopoly game, like every moment you're like, oh
this isn't
God,
gonna go well.
what's going to happen? Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like, I almost feel bad because the more I'm talking about it, the more I'm thinking of like potential issues with it. But I do still think it's an excellent film.
Well, so do
I really do.
And I wonder if like maybe audiences need oral cues in horror films, because, you know, horror film scores are super important. And so maybe we need to be given that extra hand to know when things are about to go wrong, and when we know we can, like, because it is, as we said, a stressful film where it's like, okay, you can have a moment or two,
you know, and you basically you can entirely, and I do mean this is a good thing, you can entirely sort of switch your brain off in a way. Like, this film was I remember sitting there in Dolby, and it's like, it's an entirely sensory experience. Like, you don't have to so much think, you just feel the whole way through, don't you? You're just responding to what you're seeing and what you're hearing, and it is like this emotional roller coaster, as opposed to one of those sorts of films like a Benson and Moorhead film, or even 10 Cloverfield Lane, when you're constantly going, what's happening here? What's thinking about this and thinking about this, and thinking about the meta layer of like, how does this relate to Cloverfield or whatever. I just remember the first time watching A Quiet Place, all of us came out just like quivering, right?
Yeah, well, do you know what? You're totally right. And that, when you mentioned it about it being old-fashioned, perhaps that's part of it. Yeah. Because it's an experiential horror film, isn't it? That you're in it and you're immersed in it, and at the end you're really shaken up. Yeah. You don't have to like try and work it out as you go along. No. It's just like, here it is in your face. Yeah.
There's nothing really left to kind of necessarily there's not really much ambiguity to it or anything. It just is what it is. It's an amazing experience.
And the aliens, we don't know why they're there, we don't know what they want, and we never do find out. It doesn't matter. That's not what the film is about.
And actually, let me briefly finish by asking you a bit about the sequel. Like, we won't talk about this in depth, but what did you think of A Quiet Place 2?
Well, I really liked it. Yeah. But I don't know whether that is because that was the first film back in the cinema after lockdown. So I was so overjoyed to be there. And even, you know, the countdown, the IMAX countdown was just like, this is bliss, this is bliss, this is the greatest moment of all time.
I know, right? There's something really special about it. Like we keep saying, this idea that these films are these kind of amazing sensory experiences, and going to watch that, I was the same as you, my first experience in a cinema watching A Quiet Place 2, which I knew was going to be so good in a way to see on a big screen and with amazing sound system and everything, you know, it really added. Yeah.
I mean, so again, I think there are some slightly dodgy, not plot holes, because they aren't holes, but things where people do things that they wouldn't do, or things happen where it's like in the first A Quiet Place, where it's like, oh, another fucking thing.
Yeah.
Like,
and it's sort of doing that sort of 28 weeks later thing, isn't it? Where it's like expanding on this world now, which again kind of introduces more issues potentially, doesn't it?
It does. So like, you know, that you have the characters of the fisherman people, and it's like, why though? Why would you do that? Yeah. Like, that doesn't make sense at all, really. But I did like, it had a triple narrative going on, which although some of it was nonsense. Yeah. Like, is the baby going to suffocate?
Oh God.
It was really tense though. So it's effective. It's effective.
I remember thinking that exactly that. Like, I was like, this is almost annoying me in how tense it's making me, but there's that, and we won't spoil too much, but there's that like device in the second one, isn't there, where they go into basically a furnace that is a lockable steel furnace, and when they go in it, and they can shut the door and they can communicate because it's steel, and so they can actually go in there and have a little chat when they need to, or they can put a crying baby in there too. But of course there is this kind of whole device where they have to put something in the door to stop it from slamming shut and locking.
Right. And if it is shut, they have to have an oxygen tank in there.
Yes, because they run out of air.
They run out of air. But one of my little niggles was like, do you remember the scene where they go to the pharmacy and it's like really still fully stocked? Yeah. Like, lovely that you would still have all these drugs and air canisters, and, you know, that's fine. That's not going to have been looted like years ago. No, not at all.
Yeah, it's true. It's again like it's a film for your for your nervous system rather than for your brain, almost, in a weird way, isn't it?
Exactly. So I mean, so while it is, you could pull it apart. I don't. For me, that's not what it's for.
No,
it's an experience, and it was a good cinema experience. I thought
it really was. I really enjoyed it too. Do you think we'll get more of them? Do you want to see more of them? Do you want to see A Quiet Place 3?
Maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I don't know whether it would work as well at home.
No.
It does feel like cinema to me.
It really does, actually. I even rewatching A Quiet Place 1 this week at home. I still enjoyed it, but it didn't have the impact for me that it did first time around.
No, which is why I was sort of able to laugh at the whole laundry, baby, grain silo. Whereas when I watched it the first time, no way would I laugh at that. I was like, oh. But yeah, would I like to see a third one? Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't. I'd go. Yeah, it's so true. I would go as well. There you go. Anything else you want to mention on A Quiet Place? Anything we've missed? Any highlight moments or scariest moments? I think we've covered most of it. Yeah, I think so. The bit that I jumped at most watching it yesterday, weirdly, was the bit where the raccoons.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know why that got me, but it really did. I was like, ugh.
But again, right, doesn't it also make you think, why weren't they immediately eaten, those raccoons?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, anyway.
Well, that's, yeah.
Yeah. But we won't go into that, No,
yeah, that is a fair point. But yeah, I think it still holds up. I think
it really does.
A good movie.
It really does. There you go. Well, Rosie, thank you so much. What a pleasure it's been. And let me finish by asking you, as I always ask, what's your favourite film in this subgenre? What's your favourite alien sci-fi horror film?
This is not my favourite, but I was thinking about The Arrival of Wang.
Oh, yeah.
As I often do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember really liking that and thinking that was good.
Yeah.
I enjoyed Super 8 at the time, although I don't think that quite holds up.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I'm a big fan of 10 Cloverfield Lane. I mean, I really am.
Know,
but that's
right?
just not for the aliens. That's just a...
I know. Yeah, 10 Cloverfield Lane. I know, it's hard, isn't it? I think it's really hard to beat Alien and The Thing, I think, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like, oof, that's a high bar, those two films,
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's a difficult one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because when I was looking through, like, there are, like, The Endless, for example, I love, and I think that's a stone cold 5-star movie.
Yeah, we talked at length together, haven't we, about trying to figure out The Endless.
Yes, I know, and you did that amazing interview, and you got lots of actual answers.
Yes, because you said to me, you were like, "Can you please ask them
I just really
this
needed
and this and this?" And I was like, and I did. Like, and they had such interesting answers for all of them.
Yeah, they did, and they properly answered you, which was just a delight. But then, can you say that The Endless, which is relatively new, is better than The Thing? Not
I know,
really.
And also they're so different.
Not in
they?
good conscience,
No, I know.
So I know that's a bit of a non-answer, so I guess I'll just say The Thing.
I love it. Amazing. Well, Rosie, thank you so much. Just remind us where people can find more of your stuff, more of your writing and other work out there online.
So I'm the UK editor and print editor of Den of Geek. So if you come along to the website, there'll be lots of me writing about stuff. But also, we now have a quarterly print magazine, which you can subscribe to, which I look after, and it's my pride and joy. So please come to the site and subscribe to the actual physical print magazine.
Support physical print media, right?
Yeah. Oh, and it's also it's not newsstand; it's free.
Oh my god!
There is a postage and packing cost, but. It's not an expensive thing.
Even more reason. Amazing. Yeah. Rosie, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mike.
And that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening, and a huge thank you to this week's brilliant guest, Rosie Fletcher. Always such a pleasure to have Rosie back on the podcast, and no doubt she will be back again next series. So that's it. We've done it. Our deep dive discussions have ended. What a great double bill to end with. 10 Cloverfield Lane and A Quiet Place. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. What did you think of these two movies? What did you think of this week's episode? Please do get in touch. You can email me, evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. And don't forget, you can also find us on all the socials, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. And if you want to discuss this week's episode with fellow listeners, then join the discussion group. That's the Evolution of Horror discussion group, and you can find that on Facebook. You can find this podcast in all the normal podcast platforms, and if you get a sec, I would be so grateful if you could drop us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts, which really helps us get discovered by new listeners. So that's it. we've reached the end of the series. Next week, there's nothing left to do but conclude our series on alien, sci-fi and cosmic horror. So next week, it's going to be just me. I'm going to be looking back at what we've learned on this alien series over the last 30 weeks. I'm going to be reading some audience feedback and comments. I'm going to be responding to some of your questions, and I'm going to finish by counting down the listeners' top 10 alien movies of all time. So if you haven't already sent me your top 10s, please get those in quick. evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. And a huge thank you to all of you. I've had hundreds of you send in your top 10s since I put out a request on social media. So thank you for that. I will be counting down all of your top 10 alien movies of all time. So I cannot wait to see the results. Join us next week for all of this and more on the Evolution of Horror.